So last week we looked at 1 Corinthians 15, verses 50 to 58. And if you were here last week, I said that I thought that those 9 verses there at the end of chapter 15 were the apex. They're the climax of the book of 1 Corinthians. It really doesn't get any better than 1 Corinthians 15, 50 to 58. So now this morning, we're going to go into a transition as we move from chapter 15, where Paul really discusses some really high theology. We now move into chapter 16, where things get really practical for Paul. In particular, as we start chapter 16, we see that Paul is talking about a fundraising effort that he has been participating in and promoting. Look at what he says in chapter 16, verse 1. It says, "Now concerning the collection for the saints, as I directed the churches in Galatia, so you also are to do." Now, this may seem like a really abrupt transition, because last week we heard these great and powerful and beautiful verses where Paul says, "Death is swallowed up in victory. Oh, death, where is your sting?" And we're getting all pumped up about this, and then immediately says, "Now, concerning the collection." And some of you who are more cynical are saying, you know what, I expected this. It always comes down to money in church, doesn't it? You know, you hype me up with the promise of the resurrection, and then you're asking me to open up my wallet. It's about what I expect from church. And if you are cynical about churches talking about giving and money, I think you have every reason to be. I don't know if you guys saw on the news this week, it was all over the internet, this preacher out of Louisiana, he said that God told him to buy a new jet. Now, never mind, this guy already has 4 jets, okay? But God wants him to have this new jet, and he's asking his people to donate $54 million because God wants him to have a jet. In his plea for donations, he said, if Jesus were physically alive on earth today, he wouldn't be riding a donkey. He'd be in an airplane preaching the gospel all over the world. So I don't necessarily fault you for being a little bit cynical when churches ask people to give money. There are fools and charlatans out there who are greedily lining their own pockets in the name of Jesus, to their shame. So we should be a little leery when we hear the church talking about giving. But just because there are false teachers out there with evil motives does not mean that we get to ignore what God's word says about giving. And so as we come to 1 Corinthians chapter 16, we have to deal with this topic. We have to talk about money and giving and offerings and generosity. And in fact, we should not be the least bit hesitant to talk about money in the church. Did you know that the number one topic that Jesus talked on while he was on this earth was money? He spoke more about money than just about any other topic. And I think it's important for us to talk about money because money is one of those things that reveals something about our soul. How you spend your money reveals what you truly value. How you spend your money reveals your values. And if Jesus really is our Lord, that means Jesus is our Lord of every aspect of our life, including our finances. Jesus is Lord of our bank account. And so this morning we come to a passage like 1 Corinthians 16, and we're going to address the topic of giving and generosity, and we're going to do it without apology. Now, when Paul here talks in 1 Corinthians 16 about this collection, he's not talking about a general topic of giving. He's actually talking about a very specific fundraising effort that he's been promoting all during his ministry. He's talking about a collection that he's taking up for some disadvantaged or poor church members back in Jerusalem. At this time, the Judean province, or the city of Jerusalem in particular, was going through some tremendous economic hardship. A lot of this was politically driven, but the church in Jerusalem was struggling financially. They were under an economic hardship. And so we see that Paul, throughout the New Testament, as he goes to the various churches, he is actively engaging in raising a collection to give that money to the church in Jerusalem to help their brothers and sisters in Christ back there deal with this issue, this economic crisis. One Bible commentator states it this way. It says, Paul has been raising funds for the poor in Jerusalem for 20 years by the time we get to 1 Corinthians 16. After the proclamation of the gospel, this collection appears to be his highest priority in his travels. So this collection for the saints in Jerusalem here that we see in 1 Corinthians 16 is something that comes up a lot as you read through the letters of Paul and you read in the book of Acts. In fact, besides what we're reading here in 1 Corinthians 16, there are 5 other places that we see in the New Testament where we read about Paul's collection for the poor Christians back in Jerusalem. Let's take a look at one of those. Turn over to Romans 15. Romans 15, and we'll see a little bit more color as to this collection that he's taking up. Romans 15, starting in verse 24. By way of background, the book of Romans is a letter that Paul is writing to the church in Rome. And he's talking to them about his future plans to go to Rome. He wants to go to Rome, and he wants to visit them. And so he's going to talk about his plans to get to Rome in Romans 15, starting in verse 24. Paul says, I hope to see you in passing as I go to Spain, and to be helped on my journey there by you, once I have enjoyed your company for a while. At the present, however, I am going to Jerusalem, bringing aid to the saints. For Macedonia and Achaia have been pleased to make some contribution for the poor among the saints at Jerusalem, for they were pleased to do it, and indeed they owe it to him. For if the Gentiles have come to share in their spiritual blessings, they also ought to be of service to them in material blessings. When therefore I've completed this, and I've delivered them what has been collected, I will leave for Spain by way of you. So what Paul is saying is, I'm heading to Spain. That's my ultimate goal. I want to go proclaim the gospel in Spain. But on the way, I'll stop by Rome, say hi, we'll have a cup of coffee, we'll talk, and then I'm on to Spain. But in the meantime, I can't get there yet because I need to go to Jerusalem. Now, if you looked at a map from where Paul is writing this, Jerusalem is in the east, Rome is directly the opposite direction in the west. And these aren't close by. I mean, this is many, 1,000 miles in order for him to get to Jerusalem, and then another 2,000 miles to get back to Rome. He's saying, I want to come visit you, but first I have to go to Jerusalem. Why? Because the churches in Macedonia and the churches in Achaia have gotten together a collection to help for aid relief for the Christians there in Jerusalem. Now, when he says the churches in Macedonia is a region where we see the cities of Philippi and Thessalonica, and so you may recognize those from the book of Acts or other books of the Bible. And when he says Achaia, this is the province of which Corinth is the capital. And so as we are reading here in the book of 1 Corinthians chapter 16, he's referring to this particular collection because they are the capital city of Achaia. And so he is raising up funds, and he's asking here in 1 Corinthians 16, for the church there in Corinth to help raise up some funds so he can take it to Jerusalem to help the poor who are there. So that leads to us to ask the question, why in the world are we studying or reading about or trying to apply some sort of collection that was taken 2,000 years ago? I mean, we're no longer trying to raise funds for the poor Christians in Jerusalem. This is a 2,000-year-old fundraising effort. Hasn't that gone by? What does this have to do with us today? Well, while there are a specific application for the Corinthians, I think there's a more general application for giving that we can find here in 1 Corinthians 16. And so while we are not necessarily giving this morning or right now to a fundraising effort that expired 2,000 years ago, there are some general principles that we can take from giving. Throughout the scripture, there are two general places where we are supposed to be giving away our finances, where we're supposed to show generosity. So let me talk to you about those two places where we are being asked by the Bible to give our money. First of all, we are to give to those in need. We are to give to those who are in need. Just as the Corinthians were giving aid to the poor Christians in Jerusalem, it was the regular pattern of the early church to meet the physical and material needs of those who were disadvantaged. The Apostle John, in his typically blunt style, says this in 1 John 3:17. He says, if anyone has the world's goods and sees his brother in need, yet closes his heart against him, how does God's love abide in him? Little children, let us love not in word or talk, but in deed and in truth. Here's the fundamental principle. If you see a need and you've got the resources to meet that need, God expects you to meet the need. If you see a need and you've got the resources to meet the need, then meet the need. So we should be giving in order to meet the material needs of people who are poor and disadvantaged. But the scriptures also give us a second place where we should be giving our money. The scriptures also say that we should give money to those who provide for our spiritual care. We should give money to those who provide for our spiritual care. Turn to 1 Timothy chapter 5. 1 Timothy chapter 5, and we're going to read about how we are supposed to be giving to those who provide for our spiritual care. 1 Timothy 5:17 says this, let the elders who rule be considered worthy of double honor, especially those who labor in preaching and teaching. For the scripture says, you shall not muzzle an ox when it treads out the grain, and the laborer deserves his wages. So just to be clear here, when he talks about giving elders who rule well a double honor, that double honor means more than just a, hey, you're doing a good job, but it's actual financial remediation for what they've given to us. And that's why it says here, the laborer deserves his wage. So it is biblical for us to support our pastors and our elders who labor well at preaching and teaching. We primarily do that by giving to the local church. Giving pay to your pastor is biblical and it's appropriate. And when you give money here at Ekklesia, you are giving money to support the pastors and the staff who put in long hours so that we can come here and worship God and hear the word of God. So to demonstrate this, I want to share with you a little bit of what the financial budget here is at Ekklesia. If you are giving to Ekklesia, where does your money go? How do we use your money? So let me give you a breakdown, a big overview of the breakdown of Ekklesia's budget. 60% of the budget of Ekklesia is personnel expense. 60% is personnel expense. That includes the salaries, wages, healthcare, retirement, payroll taxes for our pastors and our other ministry staff. So 60% is personnel expense. 27% goes to renting facilities and other operational costs. So it costs money to rent Cal Young Middle School on a Sunday morning, and we also rent our church offices over on Crescent Street and other operational costs. That's about 27% of what we spend here at Ekklesia. Another 13% goes to outreach ministries and missions. This includes our contribution to the work in Burkina Faso, local outreach events, giving to those who are in need, and the like. So 60% personnel costs, 27% facility, 13% missions and outreach ministries. Why do I bring this up? Because when you give to Ekklesia, you're being biblical. You're adhering to 1 Timothy 5:17, which says we are to give double honor to those elders who rule well, especially those involved in preaching and teaching. So we're being biblical by giving to the local church. So we are to give to those who are in need, and we are to give to the local church. But back here in 1 Corinthians 16, Paul is talking to them about a different contribution. He's talking about this contribution to the poor in Jerusalem. Yet as we read what he says about this, I think we're going to be able to pick up and apply what he's saying to them for this particular collection to the other ways in which we should be giving as well. And so this morning, as we go through 1 Corinthians 16, we're going to look at 7 principles for giving applicable to us. 7 principles for giving. So if you're taking notes, write down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 on down your page. I'm going to give you 7 principles of giving here that Paul gives us to the Corinthians. Giving principle number 1, be consistent. Be consistent in your giving. Take a look at verse 2 of 1 Corinthians 16. He says, on the first day of every week, each of you is to put something aside and store it up as he may prosper, so that there will be no collecting when I come. Paul tells the Corinthians that on the first day of the week, which is Sunday, that they should set some of their money aside for the collection. It's a very interesting verse because it tells us 2 things about the first century church. First of all, it demonstrates that Christians have always worshiped on Sunday. Secondly, it tells us that Christians have always taken up a collection on that Sunday morning gathering. So which is why now, 2,000 years later, we still meet on Sunday morning. And why we still, on Sunday morning, have the give cans available for us to give a contribution. It's biblical, and it's something the church has been doing for 2,000 years. But why does Paul want them to give each week? If this is a one-time collection, if he's taking up one fundraising effort for this one-time aid to give to the church in Jerusalem, why does he need them to give every week? It's just a one-time collection. The reason why is in the last part of this verse where he says, so that there will be no collecting when I come. Paul wants them to be consistent in their giving. He wants them to give regularly, and he doesn't want them to wait until he arrives to take up the collection. Why? Because when he comes to receive it, if they hadn't been saving up for this, and he comes and he says, hey, why don't you give to this important cause, they would only have what happened to be in their pockets that particular Sunday morning. But if they give a little bit every week and save it up, then when he comes, he's going to have a whole lot more for the collection than if he just collected on a one-time offering. You see, Paul knows a little economic fact. The truth is that for most of us, we spend just exactly the amount that we make. In fact, maybe just a little bit more. And none of us happen to have, for the most part, a lot of money just sort of sitting around. And think about it, that's why when you go to buy a car, almost everybody takes out a loan to buy a car, because nobody has $20,000 or $30,000 just sitting around to go buy a brand new car for cash. But car makers know that you may have, $200, $300, $400, $500 a month that you can make a payment with and eventually be able to pay for that car. And so this whole idea of this installment plan is something that we understand, because we don't happen to have $20,000 sitting around to buy a car, so we have these installment plans. Paul gets it. He's saying the same thing. If I just show up and say, hey, what do you got on a Sunday morning, it's going to be whatever spare change they have. But he says if you give a little bit every single Sunday, then by the time I get there, then there's going to be actually something of substance that I can use for this contribution. So he says, set aside a little bit each week. Now, the same holds true for us. If we wait until we see some great need before we make a contribution, you know what? We're not going to have the money just sitting around in our pockets to meet the need. So instead, we need to be consistent in our giving. We need to be regular in our giving. For most of us, that probably means that we should be giving at least as regularly as you receive a paycheck. So if you get your paycheck, set some aside right then and there. Set aside a little bit for the Lord's work every month or every couple of weeks, however you're paid, and that's probably the best way to go about it. Let me be really practical about that for you guys. Here at Ekklesia, we have a lot of different ways that we can give. We have our give cans, which are up here on Sundays, and you can put in a check or you can put in cash. We also, however, have an app that you can download called PushPay. You hear us talk about this every week. And one of the cool things about PushPay, if you've ever been into it, one of the things you can do is you can set up a recurring gift so that you don't have to go in or remember to go in every week or every month or whenever you get your paycheck and send money to the church. You can actually say, hey, on the 15th of every month, set aside this amount of money. It'll go debit your account and it'll transfer it over to Ekklesia automatically. And that's a great way that if you're struggling with being consistent, with being regular in giving, that might be one way that you could be a little bit more consistent in your giving. Now, I have to confess to you that this is something that I struggled with, especially early on in my marriage, to being consistent in my giving. Because, you see, I married a very generous woman. I don't like to think of myself as being stingy, but compared to my wife, I'm a downright Scrooge. And I realized this early in my marriage because my wife kept giving my money away. And I'm a very, very detail-oriented person with money. I'm a banker. That's my profession. I work in a bank. So just like you could expect from a banker, I track everything down to the penny. I know exactly where my money's going. I've got a budget. I know how much money we're supposed to spend on groceries, how much money we're supposed to spend on this and that. And I track it meticulously. And she kept breaking my budget by giving money away to people. So I had to... At first, I was kind of taken aback by this, but I realized that I actually needed to not just accommodate my wife's generosity, but I needed to encourage it because God has gifted her especially with generosity. And so what I had to do is I had to create a line item in my budget, which I call miscellaneous giving, which is just so my wife can go give money away, which is awesome. It's this sort of generosity slush fund where I set aside a certain amount every month for this generosity slush fund. And so we have an amount set aside to give to people who we know are struggling or who are in need. That's above and beyond what we give to the church. We just have this miscellaneous money there so that if we see a need, we can just meet it. We don't have to wait for it. We don't have to I'd really like to, but I just made my car payment, so I can't. We set it aside. And this has done two things for us. The first thing it does is it makes sure that we have money ready to meet a need. It's set aside out of our budget. We take it right out of it's like we write a check for that amount, and so it's available for us at any time. And then if we don't happen to use it in a particular month, we roll it over, so we have twice as much to give the next month. And so that's been a great way to help us do that. The second thing it does is it forces us to look for the need. Because sometimes we're not very good at seeing the needs that are all around us. And there are people around us. There are people here this morning. Some are really struggling financially. And if we open it, sometimes we need something to get us to open our eyes to see those needs around us. And so because we've got that money sitting there, if it accumulates into the second month, I'll say like, hey, we didn't spend that last month on somebody's need. We need to give that. Let's keep our eyes open. Let's be looking for where that need might come. And that's been a great tool for us. Now, I'm not saying that you all need to create a generosity slush fund, because not all of you need to accommodate a generous wife. But I do know that we all need some sort of discipline so that we can give regularly, so that we can be consistent in our giving. Whether that's using push pay, a line item in your budget, whatever your system is, we all need to establish some level of discipline for giving, because if we just give whatever happens to be in our pocket when the need arises, there's not going to be enough there to meet the need. So let's be consistent in our giving. Giving principle number 2. Principle number 2, be involved. Be involved in giving. Take again a look at verse 2. It says, on the first day of every week, each of you is to put something aside. Each of you is to put something aside. Paul expected everyone in the church in Corinth to contribute. He didn't just ask the rich people of the church to contribute. He didn't just ask those in leadership to contribute. He said, everyone, each of you should contribute. So oftentimes, we think that we're not rich enough to give. We think that philanthropy is something for the rich people. That's what Bill and Melinda Gates do, right? Rich people give because they have to deal with the guilt of their riches. And so that kind of helps them with that. And I'm not rich. I've got no guilt. No problem. I don't need to give. Besides, I can barely make ends meet as it is. I don't have anything to give. And so we think this doesn't apply to us. But Paul says each of you is to be involved in the contribution. In Luke 21, Jesus is sitting in the temple with his disciple, and he sees the people coming to give their offerings in the temple, and he sees rich people putting in just tons of money into those give boxes. And then he sees a poor widow come, and she just puts in 2 pennies, 2 little pennies into the give box. And this is what Jesus says. He says, truly I tell you, this poor widow has put in more than all of them. For they contributed out of their abundance, but she, out of her poverty, put in all she had to live on. Even the 2 pennies of the widow, God can use for his great glory. Now, Jesus is not saying that if you're poor, you should give away your very last penny, but he is lifting her up as a positive example that says whether you are rich or whether you are poor, we are to be involved in giving to the Lord. Rich or poor, we should all be involved in giving. If you've been waiting to get involved in giving to the Lord until you have more money to give, let me give you a little hint. You will never have enough to start giving if that's your attitude. Because you're never going to have extra, because we always spend as much as we make. So if you're waiting until you get rich before you start giving, you'll never start giving. The scriptures say, he who is faithful in a little will be faithful in a lot. So if you're saying, God, if you give me the lottery, I'll give it all. But if you're not giving right now, why would God give you the lottery? Because you've already proven that you're not even willing to give out of the small amount he's given you. We are faithful in a little, then we'll be faithful in a lot. If we're not faithful with a little, then we're not going to be faithful with a lot. We should all be involved in giving. Giving is one of those spiritual rhythms that we should have as a disciple of Christ. It just should be part of who we are as a follower of Jesus. So even if you have to start small, start small. But let's all be involved in giving, rich or poor. Giving principle number 3. Number 3, be proportional in your giving. Be proportional in your giving. Look again at verse 2. On the first day of every week, each of you is to put something aside and store it up. And here's the key, as he may prosper. While each person is to be involved in giving, we're all going to be giving different amounts because God has given us different levels of prosperity. And so we should all give as we prosper. So we should give in proportion to how much God has blessed us. While we all need to be involved in giving, we don't all give the same amount. Rich people should give more than poor people. Poor people should give less than rich people. Being proportional is only fair. And the more you make, the more you should give. What that means is, if you start making more, then you should start giving more because God has given you more prosperity from which he expects us to give. And so what that means, just being practical, if you get a raise at work, then you should be increasing the amount that you give by at least the percentage increase of your raise, maybe a little more, because we should all give as we prosper. Or if you get a bonus, or if you get some sort of financial windfall, we should be giving a portion of that bonus or a portion of that windfall. Why? Because we give as we may prosper. We should be proportional in our giving. Now, some of you at this point are probably wondering, as I'm talking about giving proportionally, if I'm talking about giving a tithe. So let's talk a little bit about tithing. Now, some of you have no idea what the word tithe means. I think it's a word that we only use in church. It's a churchy word. And tithe is actually an old English word, and it just means a tenth. It means literally 10%. And to tithe means to give 10% of your income to the Lord. That we would give 10% of everything we make to the Lord. Tithing is not a synonym for giving or offering. Tithing means a mandatory gift of 10%. And in the Old Testament, tithing was mandatory. Tithing was an involuntary tax that the people of Israel paid in order to take care of temple worship and the help of the poor. And in actuality, as you study the Old Testament, you actually find that there are 3 different tithes given at different times in the Old Testament. So that when you add it all up, most Bible scholars think that the people of Israel were required not to give 10%, but it actually works out to be more about 22% when you take all the different tithes into account. Now, while tithing was mandated for the people of Israel in the Old Testament, tithing is not mentioned as an instruction to the New Testament church anywhere in the New Testament. The New Testament has a lot to say about giving, but nowhere in the New Testament is there a mandated 10% mentioned. Because of this, there is some disagreement in the church as to whether or not the tithe is applicable to the New Testament church. And so what I'm about to share with you, just to be blunt, is my personal viewpoint. And there are other people who disagree with my viewpoint on the tithe, and there are some people even within this own church who will disagree about what I'm going to say about the tithe. But from what I read in the New Testament, I do not believe that the tithe is a New Testament principle. That is to say, I do not believe that we are obligated to give 10% of our income to the church. Now hear me. I'm not saying it's wrong to give 10% to the church. That's awesome. If you're giving 10%, awesome. Keep doing it. I'm just saying I don't see anywhere in the New Testament where it's actually mandated. I do, however, think that it might be a good benchmark, or it might be a good starting point for us to think as we think about giving. However, I cannot in good conscience as a Bible teacher tell you that when Paul says here that we should be proportional in our income, that he is saying that we need to give 10% of our income. It doesn't say that in the passage, and it is not a standard established in the New Testament. So you're probably wondering then, well, how much am I supposed to give? If it's not 10%, is it 8? Is it 12? How much should I give? Well, we're going to get to that in a little bit. Just hang on. That's the cliffhanger. For now, without mandating an exact percentage, what I can say for certain from God's word is that we all need to be involved in giving, and it should be proportional to our income. The more we make, the more we should give. Let us be proportional in our giving. Okay, giving principle number 4. Giving principle number 4, be wise. Be wise in your giving. Take a look at verses 3 and 4. Paul says, "And when I arrive, I will send those whom you accredit by letter to carry your gift to Jerusalem. If it seems advisable that I should go also, they will accompany me." So to understand what Paul is saying here, you have to put yourself back 2,000 years into history. Because as they're taking up this collection for the people in Jerusalem, they didn't have a push-pay app. They couldn't just go and say, okay, aid fund for Jerusalem, I'm going to give $100, go. That wasn't available to them. They couldn't even just write a check and stick it in an envelope. So how were they going to get their money to the people in Jerusalem, which is 1,000 miles away? Well, they were going to bring their coins to church, put them in a box, lock up the box, put it on a cart, and somebody had to physically take your coins down to Jerusalem. And what he's saying is, when you send that, make sure that you pick people to go with that collection whom you trust, whom you accredit by letter, he says, to make sure that you've got honorable men who will not just skim off the top, who's not going to abscond with the funds. Paul wants to make sure that there's no accusation of impropriety or corruption with the funds being raised. So he says, I don't even want you to trust me. You pick who goes with that. I'll go with them, But I want you to pick honorable men who will make sure that what we collect gets to Jerusalem. He wants to make sure that there are honorable, ethical men with whom they have entrusted their gift. Now, just as Paul has asked the Corinthians to give wisely, we need to be careful to whom we give our gifts and offerings as well. We need to pick the right people in whom to trust our offerings. Because quite frankly, there's a lot of scam artists out there who will play on your sympathies to get your money. And we need to be on guard for that. And then unfortunately, it has been my experience that Christians are sometimes a little gullible for this kind of stuff. Jesus says that his disciples are to be wise as serpents and innocent as doves. Too often Christians are about as innocent as serpents and as wise as doves. But he wants us to be wise as serpents and innocent as doves when we come to giving our money. Do you know to whom you are giving your money? Are they trustworthy? Are they blameless? Are they ethical? Are they beyond reproach? Do you know how the money is being spent? Is there any hint of impropriety with them? Here at Ekklesia, we strive to be trustworthy with the funds you give to us, both in large and small ways. Let me give you just a few examples. First of all, we engage an outside accounting firm to oversee all of our finances. So we have a third-party accounting firm who does most of the bookkeeping and most of the auditing of our books. We've also established a series of checks and balances so that no one person has control over the money of this church. So Wesley can't just write a check to whoever he wants. There's a system of checks and balances to make sure that the money's being used appropriately and according to our budget. The salaries of our staff are set by a core group of central elders, who are not on the payroll, by the way, and are based upon market studies showing salary ranges for pastors of similar positions. So Wesley doesn't get to pick his own salary. It's chosen by the central elders, and it's based upon a market studies to make sure that we're in the range of what a pastor of a similar sized church would be making. And that's true of all of our staff. We do that. Finally, then, we require that at least 2 people be present whenever money is being counted or collected and deposits are being prepared, so that no one person ever is alone with the money. We do that because everything we strive to do here at Ekklesia, we strive to do financially responsible. We want to be above reproach with the monies that you give to us. But whether or not you give money here to Ekklesia or you give money to other organizations, you need to be wise with how you give your money. Let us be wise in our giving. So that's principle number 4. For principles 5, 6, and 7, I want us to flip over to 2 Corinthians chapter 9. Flip over to 2 Corinthians chapter 9. 2 Corinthians is the sequel to 1 Corinthians. 1 Corinthians, of course, is a letter that Paul wrote to the church in Corinth. And about a year later, he writes his second letter to them, which we call 2 Corinthians. And when we get to 2 Corinthians chapter 9, one of the things we find is that he has not yet been to Corinth to pick up the collection. And so he's going to come up, address this topic again, saying, hey, I know we started talking about it in the first letter. Now a year later, let's bring it up again and make sure you guys are following through. It appears as we get to 2 Corinthians verse 9 that the Corinthians responded very favorably to his call for this collection in 1 Corinthians chapter 16, because he says that they had a certain enthusiasm and a zeal for the collection. So it's like they got the first letter. Paul says, hey, give to this cause. They're like, we're going to do it. We're excited. We're on board. We're going to really follow through. We're going to make it happen. But then, and that was to the point where Paul started bragging about how excited they were about this gift as he's talking to other churches. But you'll catch a little hint here that he also seems to have some question as to how well they've actually followed through on their enthusiastic zeal. Take a look at what he says here in 2 Corinthians 9, starting in verse 1. He says, now it is superfluous for me to write to you about the ministry for the saints, for I know your readiness, of which I boast about you to the people of Macedonia, saying that Achaia has been ready since last year, and your zeal has stirred most of them up. So your enthusiasm for this giving project has been so infectious that now the people of Macedonia want to join too. Look what he says next though. He says, verse 3, but I am sending the brothers so that our boasting about you may not prove empty in this matter, so that you may be ready, as I said you would be. Otherwise, if some Macedonians come with me and find that you are not ready, we would be humiliated, and to say nothing of you for being so confident. What is he saying? It's really cool that you got enthusiastic about this. You're like, yeah, I'm on fire, let's do this. But let's make sure that when I get there, you actually have something to give. Otherwise, you're going to be embarrassed, and I'm going to be embarrassed about this. So principle number 5 is this: be thorough in your giving. Be thorough in your giving. Paul is saying here, I'm really glad you're enthusiastic, but did you follow through? And I'm going to send some people ahead of me who are going to check and make sure that you've actually been setting some aside each and every week so that by the time I get there, you're going to be ready with the gift. Because I don't want to be embarrassed when I come and there's not much of a collection. And you don't want to be embarrassed either. I really hope you followed through. Follow through, quite frankly, is something a lot of us struggle with. We'll hear a teaching like this and we think, yeah, that's great. I'm on board. I want to give to the Lord. That's an exciting thing to do. And so we get pumped up about it. And, for a first month or two, we're giving, we're feeling good about it. But then something happens. Maybe your dishwasher breaks. And you think, oh, I really need to get that fixed. And so we spend our money on that and we siphon the money off from what we gave to the Lord and we get the dishwasher fixed. Because, the Lord understands. He doesn't want me to do dishes by hand. So I'm going to take some of that and I'll take care of that first. And then the next week it's something else, or then the next month you just forgot to write the check. You get here and you say, oh shoot, I forgot to write the check at home. And then before you know it, you've just established a habit of where kind of your zeal for giving is just kind of peters out and we don't follow through. And that happens all the time, people. I've seen it in my own life. You've probably seen it in your life as well. It's easy to get excited. It's easy to make a commitment. It's a little harder to follow through month after month after month. Let me just ask you this. If someone were to see a record of your giving to this church or wherever, would they be encouraged or would you be embarrassed? Paul is hoping that the Corinthians will be not embarrassed by their giving. Let us also then be thorough in our giving. Let us follow through. Principle number 6, be willing. Be willing to give. Take a look at verse 5 of 2 Corinthians chapter 9. Be willing. He says, so I thought it necessary to urge the brothers to go on ahead of you and to arrange in advance for the gift that you have promised, so that it may be ready as a willing gift, not an exaction. The point is this: whoever sows sparingly will reap sparingly. Whoever sows bountifully will reap bountifully. Each one must give as he has decided in his heart, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. Paul has just expressed some concern that they were going to follow through on his commitment, but he wants to make sure that the reason they're giving is not because they're feeling guilty or that they feel compelled to do so. He wants them to give willingly. He wants them to give voluntarily, out of their own desire, not because someone has told them they have to do it. It's interesting, neither here in 1 Corinthians 16 nor in 2 Corinthians 9 does Paul ever tell them how much they need to give. He doesn't say you each need to give $100 or you each need to give 10% or 5%. He doesn't state that at all. In fact, what he states is each one must give what? As he has decided in his heart. Paul doesn't want to coerce them. He doesn't want to give out of fear of judgment. He wants them to give out of their own free will offering, not one of exaction. Now, as a leader in the church, I think it's kind of too bad that Paul says this, because guilt and compulsion can be a very effective tool. We could just lay the guilt trip on you guys and, the wallets would open up. But the problem is that doesn't last very long. Once the guilt's gone, there's no permanence to that. And we shouldn't be giving out of guilt. We should be giving because we're willing to do so. When we encourage people to give out of guilt, what we're saying is that God needs your gift. If you don't give, then God's not going to be able to do what he needs to do. And guess what? God doesn't need our gifts. It's not like God's sitting back saying, man, I could do some really awesome things, but those people, they're just so stingy. I don't know what I'm going to do. I've got no money. If God needs the money, he can make money. It's not hard for him. We don't give because God needs it. We give because you need it. You need to give. It affects us. It changes us. Giving is for us, it's not for God. And so we don't guilt people into giving, because if God wants to raise up funds, God will raise up the funds. We give because we want to give. We give because we are willing to give. If you are giving because you're afraid of being judged for not giving, you're giving for the wrong reasons. If you're giving because you feel like you owe it or it's some duty, it's like a membership due for this church, you're giving for the wrong reasons. If you're giving because it makes for a good tax write-off, you're giving for the wrong reasons. I'm not saying you can't use the tax write-off, but if that's your reason for giving, it's really a wrong motive. We need to give willingly. We need to give voluntarily. We need to give not out of compulsion. So let me go back to that original, that question we had earlier. How much do we give? I don't want to give out of guilt. I don't want to get out of pressure. I don't want to get out of compulsion. But I really would like some understanding of how much should I be giving? Especially since now I've told you that I don't believe the New Testament affirms a 10% tithe. You're probably really wondering, how much should I give? I think Paul here in this chapter gives us two guidelines for knowing how much to give. Take a look at the first one here in verse 6. He says, the point is this: whoever sows sparingly will also reap sparingly. Whoever sows bountifully will also reap bountifully. How much do I give? Give as much as you want to be blessed. You want to be blessed a little bit? Give a little bit. You want to be blessed a lot? Give a lot. Because he who sows sparingly will reap sparingly. He who sows bountifully will reap bountifully. A small blessing comes from a small amount of giving. A big blessing comes from a big amount of giving. Now, I want to be clear that when he says that we are going to reap his blessings for giving, I want to be really clear that this is not some sort of guaranteed investment program where if I give $100 to God, he's somehow obligated to get me to $200 return. That's not what he's talking about here. God is not a mutual fund. That's a fallacy. And there are people out there who teach that, and they're wrong. It's false teaching. It's a lie. The blessing from God is way better than some sort of monetary return. The blessing of God in the New Testament is always set as being a future inheritance in the coming kingdom, not a material blessing in this present age. Quite frankly, if the blessings of God are material, what a shallow sort of blessing we get from God. Because you know what? After you die, that blessing's gone. Why would God reward us with something that's temporary? No, the blessings of God are eternal. They're far greater than any material blessing. So God's blessings are eternal. They're not temporary. God's blessing is the hope of the resurrection. God's blessing is peace in the midst of suffering. God's blessing is life and life abundantly, which is way better than anything money can buy us. So first, how much do we give? To the extent you want to be blessed by God. Secondly, we give as much as we purpose in our hearts. We give as much as we purpose in our hearts. Look at verse 7. Each one must give as he has decided in his heart, not reluctantly or under compulsion. In other words, give as much as you want to. Give as much as you want to. But there's a certain intentionality implied in this. When he says give as much as you have decided, it's like he's saying proactively decide how much you want to give. Don't make that decision as you're standing in line in communion and then you see the give can and you think, oh, I better give something. That's not deciding in your heart. That's being reactive, not proactive. Be proactive and intentional in praying through and thinking about what you want to give. Think about it. Go through your budget. Take it before the Lord. Take your checkbook before the Lord and say, Lord, how much do you want me to give? And then be willing to give whatever he tells you. If you're married, talk to your spouse about this. Purpose it in your heart, be intentional, and then follow through. Be willing to give. Be willing to give. Which brings us to our seventh and final principle. Be cheerful. Be cheerful in your giving. Verse 7 says, for God loves a cheerful giver. God does not like a grumpy giver. It's better for us not to give than to give with a grumpy or begrudging spirit. If you're grousing and complaining every time you're giving to the Lord, there is no blessing in you for that. God is not honored by it, and it doesn't really do you any good. Now, what I don't want you to use this as an excuse. I don't want you to say, well, I'm not a very cheerful giver. I get really grumpy every time I give, so I'm just not going to bother to give. That's not what he's saying here. This is not an excuse to stop giving. It's an excuse to change your attitude about giving. That we should change our attitude to say, I want to give. I'm excited to see what the Lord's going to do with what I give. Change your attitude. Don't give because you have to. Give because you want to. And if you don't want to, change your attitude. Give cheerfully. If we're struggling with being cheerful in our giving, I think it's because we have forgotten how much God has given to us. I think the reason why the New Testament doesn't mandate an exact amount to give is because our motivation to give should not be out of obligation. It should not be out of duty, but it should be out of gratitude for what the Lord has done for us. We give not because we have to, we give because we want to express to God our thanksgiving to him for all the blessings that he has given to us. Take a look at 2 Corinthians 9, verse 8. And God is able to make all grace abound to you, so that having all sufficiency in all things at all times, you may abound in every good work. As it is written, he has distributed freely, he has given to the poor, his righteousness endures forever. In this passage, there are two gifts that we are reminded that God has given to us. First of all, God has given to us everything we need. Look at verse 8. We're reminded that God is able to supply everything. Through his abundant grace, he has made sure that we have sufficiency in all things and in all times. Now note, sufficiency means God will provide your needs. It doesn't mean that God will provide your wants, but God will provide you with everything you need. And I would expect that almost everyone in this room probably has the basics covered. You probably have a place to sleep. You probably had food for breakfast. You're probably wearing clothes. It may not be the nicest clothes. It may not be the nicest place to live, but God has met your needs. His sufficiency is for you in all things and at all times. And notice, there's a reason why he is sufficient to provide all our needs. What does it say? So that we may abound in every good work. The reason why God is meeting your needs is not so that you can go take your Winnebago and move to Arizona and hang out in the sun. That's not what he says here. He says he is sufficient for all of your needs so that you can abound in every good work. What does that mean? God has given you everything you need to serve him well. You don't need anything else to serve him well. If you've got the attitude, well, if God just, gave me the winnings in the lottery, then I would have enough to serve him. God would say, no, you've got everything you need right now to serve me well. My grace is sufficient for you at all times and in all things so that you may abound in good works. You've got everything you need to serve the Lord well. So are we serving him well with what he's provided? God is sufficient for our needs. He will provide for us. But secondly, and more important, God has provided to us the gift of salvation. Look at verse 9. As it is written, he has distributed freely, he has given to the poor, his righteousness endures forever. You see, without Christ, we are all poor. Even if you have all the wealth of this world, without Christ, you are spiritually bankrupt. Without Christ, without a relationship with God, there is a poverty of your spirit. We are poor in spirit. And many of you sense that spiritual poverty. You sense that emptiness, even an emptiness that even money cannot satisfy. That even the richest people in the world will sometimes understand and see there's an emptiness. Money has not bought me the happiness I thought it would, because there is a spiritual poverty that we all have. Some people, however, are so caught up in their selfish materialism that they don't even realize how so spiritually impoverished they are. They're so caught up in their desire for wealth, they don't even realize they need God. That's why Jesus says it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of God. But whether or not you realize it, you are spiritually poor. And yet the Son of God left his heavenly home where he abounded in riches and he became poor as a human being. It was a little bit of a downgrade in his salary, leaving this throne of heaven to become a human being. But even in that, when he became a human being, he didn't even become a rich human being. He was poor while he was here. Poor to the point that when he died on the cross, he was stripped of his clothes and his clothes were gambled away. And he died on the cross completely 100% penniless for you. Why? 2 Corinthians 8:9 says, "For you know the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, that though he was rich, yet for your sake he became poor, so that by his poverty you might be made rich." Jesus was willing to give up the riches of heaven and become poor. Why? So that you could, in your spiritual poverty, receive the very riches of heaven. Jesus laid down his riches so that we could take up the riches of the kingdom of God. If you are not a follower of Jesus, if you do not depend upon Jesus for your salvation, if you've never given your life over to him, most of what I've said this morning is not applicable to you. There is really no point to you giving anything to this church if you don't believe in Jesus. If you're not a follower of Jesus, you don't need to give a thing. What you need to do is you need to receive. You need to receive the riches of heaven that God wants to give you. He wants to give you the riches of heaven. He wants to give you eternal life. He wants to meet all of your needs. But first, you got to come to him and admit that you're spiritually bankrupt, that you have nothing to offer God, that you have an emptiness that needs God to fill it. And if we admit our need for him, he will come in and he will bless you with riches beyond your comprehension. Come to him today and receive. Don't give a thing. Come and receive what God has for you today. For those of us who have already received the gift of salvation for Christ, for those of us who have already experienced the sufficiency of his grace in our life, may that motivate us. Motivate us to be generous out of thanksgiving, not out of obligation, but out of thanksgiving for all that he's done for us. As we remember what Christ has done, may it open up our hearts to say, everything is yours, God. Not just my money, but my entire life is yours. I give it to you. Use it as you see fit. And may that motivate us to be consistent in our giving, to be involved in our giving, to be proportional in our giving, to be wise in our giving, to be thorough, to be willing, and to be cheerful in our giving. Why? For God is able to make grace abound to you, so that having all sufficiency in all things at all times, you may abound in every good work.